Okay, I'm trying again. It's really interesting doing Facebook Lives. Sometimes it just says it's not working, and sometimes it says it is, and you just don't know. Okay, I'm going to presume that this is. So welcome, everybody. This is great. This is our first step into the reforestation strategy, and I can tell you now that I will start this journey with you, and this is just a beginning. So I'm very much assuming that I'll probably leave you with as many questions, or if not more questions than you started with, because as I sort of climb down into the ecosystem of our strategies, it'll probably bring up more for you that you're curious about. And so really what I want to do today is just give you an overview of how we do this and why we're doing what we're doing. Because there's a really interesting thing about making strong choices. You know, when you go to create a charity, when you go to sort of put your stake in the sand and say, this is what I'm going to do and this is why, what immediately happens is everybody stands up and says, well, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? And everybody essentially wants you to be doing everything, and you can't. And there needs to be a process within which you really nail down, okay, this is our remit. This little box here is what we're going to do, and we're going to figure out how to do it to the best of our ability. And everybody that wants us to do everything else that's not that, we're trying to help guide them to other organizations that are doing those things that they're really good at, because the whole reforestation and avoided deforestation and conservation movement is comprised of hundreds of different organizations that are all holding their unique pieces. And one of the things we want to do in the future, and actually we're working on it already, is really figure out how to create cohesion between the entire forest sector so that we can all start working towards this shared goal of placing ecological restoration and forest conservation into the hands of the masses. It's a huge job that's going to take all of us. And inside of that, we have our little piece, and our little piece for us actually is huge. It's immense. Tropical reforestation. And I also want to say before I start, this isn't my area of expertise inside of Tree Sisters. I'm not the reforestation director. My area of I don't know whether you'd call it expertise, but I work very strongly on the feminine empowerment side of Tree Sisters. But doing Facebook Lives is really nerve-wracking, and our reforestation director, Lauriane, who lives in La Réunion, which is an island close to Madagascar, has never done a Facebook Live before, and I do not want to put this onto her. So what I'm assuming that we'll do is, on the back of this first discussion about the trees, a lot of questions will come in the stream underneath it in the string. And I think Lauriane and I will do a Zoom call. And for those of you that like Zoom, we can probably arrange it so that you can come on live. But alternatively, we'll simply turn it into a film and we can post it. And I can get her to answer all the questions that I can't answer because it's not my area of expertise. And it's what she's doing for us. So I also want to say, you know, we're a UK charity, not US 501c3, and there's a huge difference. UK charities are some of the most rigorously, like the legal complexities and compliance for a UK charity are some of the strictest in the world, which means when we go to partner with projects, we're a complete headache for most people, because we will sit there and we will drill down and drill down and drill down, because we're moving taxpayers' money. Like, we have that responsibility to send money to the most exemplary projects that we can. And I fall in love with projects, and I really want us to fund them, and we take them through our due diligence process, and we can't get behind them because there are gaps where we just can't have gaps. So, and I'm going to talk about the due diligence process that we go through today, because I want you to understand that the projects that we've chosen have gone through exceptionally rigorous processes to become partners of ours, and then why we will stay with those partners and actually try and see what a variety of projects that they're working with, because we're also building relationship with these partnerships, which is why we've got several projects now with Eden and with We Forest and also with International Tree Foundation. And we will spread out beyond those partners, but our first goal is also to strengthen the relationships inside of our reforestation strategies. So that in the same way that the forest floor operates, we're always trying to build resilience inside of the system. And it's another reason why really being clear and focused about what we're actually doing, rather than being diffused and trying to do everything. Like this, the clearer we can get, the more effective we can be in our niche. And our niche was determined by the car crash that I had, where essentially TreeSisters was given to me fully formed, and I was told, you have to reforest the tropics within 10 years. I wasn't told you have to conserve all the rainforest, although we all know that we have to conserve all the rainforest, but I wasn't asked to start a rainforest conservation organization. I was specifically asked to plant trees, both in the consciousness of humanity and in the ground in the areas of the tropics. And why? Because the whole tropical forest belt operates as all the forests of this world are incredibly important, but this particular band, not just because the trees have almost constant growing seasons, so they sequester carbon, say, 3 times as fast as those in temperate zones, but that forest belt is absolutely vital for rain production for the planet. Vital. The whole hydrological cycle depends upon the rain production from those tropical forest belts and the oceanic currents that are all related to ice and ice melt. So there's this extraordinary balancing act going on our planet, and we're disrupting it. Obviously, we know that through climate change. But the heating that is causing the ice melt and the deforestation, which is causing breakdowns in the hydrological cycle, is starting to cause absolute weather chaos. So tropical reforestation is an imperative. It's an absolute imperative of our time. And that is our specific focus. And we are, essentially that's the zone between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. But there are jungle zones sort of just above and below. For instance, we're just starting to work in Nepal, and Nepal sits just outside the northern tropic. So it's not rigid, but it's clear. So where shall I start? I'll start with our strategic focus. And that essentially, there's 4 main areas of strategic focus that we are looking like we're scoping consistently for projects and partners. The first one is protection and expansion of intact forest landscape. This is the first one because to me it's one of the most important. There are ways that you can plant that are actively protecting and conserving forest as well. So whenever we plant, we're looking for those trees to be protected and conserved, obviously. But also, there are ways that you can plant around existing intact forest landscapes. Now, we've lost all but 10% of what we call the ancient intact forest landscapes of our world. And we're consistently encroaching. Like, we're consistently, the peoples of those lands who aren't actually living in the forest and being stewards of them, we're consistently encroaching for agriculture and for goodness knows how many other things. And hold on one second. Mark, can you please just move the chickens? They're really distracting me. I can't think straight. Sorry, it's not a dog moment, it's a chicken moment this time. And so, for instance, let me think. In Cameroon, we haven't started planting in Cameroon yet, but this is a perfect example of this. Actually, I'll start with an area that we are in. So Kenya. Kenya and Mount Kenya. There's been colossal deforestation there. There is watershed degradation going on there. And the people, the farmers, are consistently going into the forests to take for firewood and to take for their animals and all the rest of it. So that project is essentially 70% forest restoration, 30% agroforestry. The forest restoration basically means that we're planting around the existing forest, so we're expanding it. And that forest, the new forest, protects the intact forest landscape. The 30% agroforestry essentially means that we are working with the local farmers who would usually be encroaching into those existing forests and depleting them to work with trees on their own farms, to turn their farms into sort of mini forest landscapes where it's polyculture, where they are working with multiple species of trees alongside their animal husbandry. All their needs are met on their own farms, and they no longer need to go and encroach. So it's this beautiful both and, where reforestation and agroforestry in partnership also does forest conservation, but from a, in my respect, a deeply restorative way. It's all about, for us, the actual planting of trees and how the planting of trees really serves the environment. Where else are we doing that? So also in Brazil with the forest corridors, we're not actually able to expand the areas of forest themselves because everything is encroached upon with farmland. But the Brazilian government have basically said they want every farm to be 20% forest, which is miraculous. And so what's happening is we're able to start growing these forest corridors with We Forest that link up the existing areas of rainforest. It's Atlantic rainforest. So there's protection, expansion of intact forest landscapes. There's also the restoration and protection of watersheds. Wherever you plant trees, you're protecting watershed, essentially. This is very strong in both of our India projects and in Kenya, but it's all of them, essentially. So the new project that we've got in the Kazi Hills right now, that is very specifically being scientifically monitored. We Forest are our most scientifically oriented partnership, and they're really looking at how you measure the impact of where we're planting right now with them. It's cloud forest in one of the most richly biodiverse areas of the mountains in the far northeast of India. And people tend to be a lot in this world of ours doing monoculture plantations, and then because that's the easiest to measure carbon sequestration and to look at what's the benefit to the soils. But actually what we need to be doing is restoring our ecosystems, whole ecosystems with as many species as are naturally found in those areas, and then to be able to scientifically prove that the watershed management is even more beneficial with multiple species, so that we can actually start to shift a lot of the bigger corporations' finances towards ecosystem restoration as opposed to just plantations, which are just another way of using trees as a crop to earn more money. So in southern India, Project Greenhouse, which was our very first project, that is our only project that is actually purely agroforestry. And that is because the climate there has completely changed now. So they used to rely on monsoons. The monsoons have now failed. We don't know when they're going to have rains. And so agroforestry means that the farmers themselves can actually be doing the drip irrigation that we need to ensure the survival of these trees. Because without drip irrigation, there's a very high probability that they won't survive. And it's a really traumatized area of the world. Like 9 of their major rivers have already gone, and this is because of intense industrial agriculture, overuse of the water, the wrong crops, the wrong trees, and colossal deforestation. So it's a really important area to be doing reforestation. And also it really supports the control of soil erosion, because what happens in these areas where you have removed the trees is the soil quality goes down, obviously, because they're not getting the rich humus that comes from the leaf litter. They're sitting in intense heat. In India, it's between 40 and 45 degrees, often. Intense heat. And rain sometimes doesn't come for 6 months or a year. So the topsoil becomes impacted like concrete. And then when the rain comes, it comes so incredibly heavily, it can't actually absorb. This is the beauty of the tree roots. This is what trees do, one of the miraculous things that trees do. They prevent runoff. They prevent soil erosion. Because the roots not only hold the soil, but they become conduits through which the water drains down into the aquifers below. So when you remove trees, basically water will run off. And so the control of soil erosion is one of the absolutely primary, this is the number 3 of our strategic focus. And you could also say that the mangrove work that we're doing in Madagascar is crucial, because basically Madagascar's been stripped. It's mountainous. The water is just flooding off the hills. It's taking all the soil. into the estuaries and out into the sea. And the mangroves are catching it. The mangroves along the estuaries are catching it. And then they're holding it and they're storing it. And now we're also being able to do, because our new project in Madagascar is dry deciduous inland, but still on a coastal area. So again, we're dealing with keeping the soil on the ground instead of having it run off. And soil erosion, essentially, you're dealing with soil fertility. So you're dealing with food. You're dealing with famine or fertility. So it's crucial. And then in partnership with that, obviously restoring topsoil and land fertility. So where removing trees decreases soil quality and allows the soil to run off, putting the trees back profoundly transforms the soil quality. And I just watched Diana Beresford-Kroger's film, The Call of the Forest, a couple of nights ago, and discovered that where you actually have forest all along coastal zones, what they call the forest leachate, which is the nutrient-rich water that drains through and then with the runoff of rain goes into the ocean, provides the basis of the particular quality of iron that all the marine species need to grow. This is amazing stuff. And so the kelp forests and everything that grows from the kelp forests are also in direct relationship with the actual forests. And when you strip an actual forest from a coastline, you will lose all the oceanic life alongside that whole stretch. So I didn't know this at all, but it's fascinating. So let's see. One of the interesting things is we're not specifically set up, or one of our mandates isn't actually endangered species or biodiversity, but it's a product of everything that we're doing. And actually, because we're doing intact forest landscape work, we're choosing also very specifically to reforest around existing forests that hold endangered species. So in Brazil, we've got 3 endangered cats, the jaguars and the pumas and the ocelots. We've got endangered monkeys. We've actually also got endangered trees. In Madagascar now, 6 different species of endangered. These are critically endangered lemurs. There are multiple species of lemurs that have already gone extinct in Madagascar. So this is one of the last remaining forest holds of these particular species of lemur. In Cameroon, we're about to start planting. This is one of our new projects. That is Mount Bambutus, again, an area of intact forest landscape that we're doing 70% ecological restoration, forest restoration around it, and then agroforestry around that so that we stop the encroachment. The last 250 cross-river gorillas, the most endangered gorillas in the world, that is what we are growing around. And in Nepal, again, we've got endangered elephants, you've got sloths, you've got endangered snakes, like critically endangered species that we are all actively wrapping our arms and our hearts around. Not specifically because we're a biodiversity organization, we're not, but because the forest is the seat and the home of all these incredible species. So that's a strategic focus, and I think, you know, inside of that, that's a geographical in a way. The socio-economic focus is that it really, really matters to us that we are working with communities that are in need, communities that don't have ordinary support and funding from huge other massive organizations, projects where the people have either generated it themselves, so they have complete ownership of it, or projects where the organizations that are going in, like Eden or We Forest, are really working to empower the local communities to take full ownership of it. Because it's like this giving a man our fish or teaching them to fish. It's like going into these places where such devastation, such social devastation has happened. The trees have been removed. The communities are dying. In Madagascar, the trees have gone and the mangroves have gone in so many of these areas. And what that means is the fish stocks are down because the mangroves actually are it's the breeding ground for the fish. And so one of the main problems in the areas that Eden Reforestation work is with people who have been trying to fish and loaning nets and boats from what they call the local fish barons. And when they don't come back with a yield, they're in debt. And when they're in debt, they become what you call indentured slaves. And indentured slaves cannot leave, have to work for them. And if they still can't provide, then they have to, in some cases, give their wives and give their children. So what Eden are doing, are they're basically going in and they are giving a wage to all the people that they're actually teaching how to do the reforestation work, whether that's mangroves or dry deciduous. What that does, it essentially means they can pay off their debts, they can start their own small enterprises, their own businesses. Mothers are getting their children back, children are being educated, healthcare can happen, poverty can stop, malnutrition can be reversed. The social implications when you restore an ecosystem are huge, multifaceted, absolutely beautiful. And you're helping these people step into profound relationship with trees. So they understand that the transformed life is as a direct relationship to ecological restoration. And thus, they become the most fervent protectors of their ecosystems. And I'll talk a bit more about this in subsequent of these Facebook Lives about the individual projects themselves, because they're stunning and they're all different. And the social economical impacts are very different because the cultures are hugely different. So how we help them grow their interdependence with the trees. Another thing is fostering women's empowerment, participation and income. So it's not always possible, depending on the cultures, that the women can get involved. But where possible, we are partnering with organizations that have really, in their experience, handed over a lot of the responsibility to women, because women ensure the ongoing health of the community, rather than what happens in a lot of places is where they've had male managers, for instance, the male managers have just taken the money and gone and used it to drink. But where the women are getting paid, they're actually bringing it back into the community and working with the children and working with other women and doing this much more community-oriented, collaborative, everybody benefits. So, interestingly, one of our new projects in the Kazi Hills, one of the reasons I love this is the Cloud Forest project. These people are one of the last remaining matrilineal tribes on the face of this planet. And what that actually means in real terms, in financial terms, is that all the wealth of the family is handed to the youngest girl, which is like the most radical concept when you think about what we've been used to over hundreds of years in all of our various countries. So the majority of the planters there are women. In Nepal and in Cameroon, up to 70% of those working are going to be women. In Madagascar, I think again between 60 and 70% of those doing the actual planting work are women. And in southern India, that's not the case. The farmers are primarily male. But one of the reasons, again, why we're doing the agroforestry in southern India is because in some of the places that we are, if a man leaves, which they are doing in huge numbers because the land is dying, very often the women aren't allowed to own the land, they're not allowed to farm the land, and nor are they able to remarry. So women are being forced into destitution, especially with the rate of farmer suicide which is going on, which is epic and tragic and horrendous because of all manner of different reasons I won't go into. But it really matters, again. It's another way they may not be doing the planting, but helping their husbands, helping the farmers rehabilitate their lands ensures that their wives and the children stay safe. What else do I need to talk to you about? I think I'll talk about survival rates because that's, and actually that will feed into the due diligence process. Actually, I'll talk about due diligence. So what that means is, this is the diligence that we do when we go find a project. So when somebody will send us one, or somebody will write to us and say, we'd really love you to work over here, we will basically send them a questionnaire that says, can you share with us your environmental priorities, your community development priorities, and your management and governance system, like an overview. And from that, we'll be able to say, do they sit inside our geographic focus, our strategic focus? Are they looking at the empowerment of women? You know, does their governance look sound? Yes, no. If yes, we'll send them a second We'll go through a second stage process, much more in depth. Really understanding their environmental drivers. So what is the basis of their project? Why are they doing what they're doing? Where they're doing it? And what is their plan for avoiding further deforestation? So great, you may be planting trees, but how are you ensuring that those trees stay in the ground? Where is it, obviously? What's the land ownership issues? Again, could this be taken away from you? Could this be stripped? Is this protected by the government? Is this protected by the communities? What's the basis on your choice of tree? So for instance, with Project Green Hands in southern India, all the soils in all the different areas that we're planting get studied. There are specific native trees that work in specific soils. We need to figure out exactly what needs to be planted so that it has the best chance of thriving. Who's growing the saplings? Who's growing the saplings? How is that actually being done? What's the transport? What's the rate of survival of the saplings between growth and planting? Community development. So, again, our specific thing there is really looking more in depth at the role of women, but also the role of other members of society. What are the tools within which the community are really educated about the trees and can bring trees into their own life? Sorry about the noise, can't deal with the neighbors. Then we go really strongly into project management and governance. So we need to understand their monitoring and evaluation. We can't simply say, we're going to give you money, you go and plant trees, and isn't that lovely? We need to be able to say, okay, if we give you money, how do you monitor and how do you evaluate? Especially for the first 2 years when a sapling is at its most vulnerable. Who is taking care of them? Who is doing the weeding around them? Who is ensuring the watering of them? Who is going in and saying, for instance, in Madagascar, one of the big difficulties you'll have is crab predation in the mangroves. So who is checking and who is going and doing the replanting? Each one of our projects actually has got really strong monitoring and evaluation, and some could be stronger, but they're building on it, and we're in partnership, understanding and supporting on how they're going about doing that. But all of them have in the cost per tree, which are very different between projects, the cost of replanting. So we know, for instance, if there's a flood, if there's a fire, if there's crab predation, if there's disease, those trees will be replanted for this within the same cost. That's all part of the cost of our trees. How often are they monitoring? Who's doing the monitoring? How is that information being brought back? What's the usage rights of the trees? And this is an interesting one because all of us want to basically say, I want a tree to be planted and I want that tree to stay there and not be used. But again, with agroforestry, a lot of these trees need to be used and they need to be replanted so that consistently trees that are used as crops are helping farmers not go into the intact rainforests or intact forest landscapes to take because they've got trees that they can pollard and they'll grow straight back up again. Or they've got hardwoods that will grow 30 years and then they'll harvest them and then they'll replant. Some areas you take a tree, you have to plant 10. So there are many, many purposes and uses for trees that actually, if communities can work with them and replant them, build the interdependence between community and tree, but simultaneously prevent any more incursion into the intact forest landscapes that we're trying to protect. We want to understand how they assess the improvements in soil and water and the social impact. My battery's running low, that could be interesting. So there is huge poverty and malnutrition issues. We want to understand as much about that and how they're reporting on that as we are about the environmental impacts. And then, once we've got all of that clarified, we drop into their governance. So we need to understand their legal status. We need to understand the nature of their governing bodies, their management structure, their staff numbers. We need to go through their annual reports. We look at their finance and administration. We get their audit reports, their financial statements, their budgets, and understand the price per tree. And this takes months. It takes months. So when people get in contact with us and say, can you just start planting over here? It's like, no. we go through a really in-depth, and this is only part 2, there's a whole part 3, and that then includes on top of part 3, which is another drilling down, getting third-party people who are in the environments of those projects to be able to report back on, are they doing what they're saying? So that by the time we actually have said, this is one of our partners and this is one of our projects, we have gone over it with a fine-tooth comb to the best of our knowledge and can say to you, this is an amazing partner, these are their values, this is their governance, this is their monitoring and evaluation. We can never ensure that every tree will survive, but we can ensure that they're replanted. We can ensure that we've chosen projects where the land is protected, where it's government supported. You know, we look for projects that have government support, because in third world countries, and I hate that term, where there is so much corruption and so much lying about where money goes and who has ownership of the land, there needs to be as like top down and bottom up collaboration around what they're trying to do. Eden are doing that brilliantly in Madagascar. They're doing it brilliantly in Nepal. The Nepalese government have decided that they want every village to have its own community forest, again, so that they can grow these forests and stop encroaching on the remaining intact forest landscapes, and then we can simultaneously start growing around those intact forest landscapes. So hopefully you start to get a sense of the rigor with which we are doing what we're doing. I haven't spoken to you much in depth about the projects themselves. It'll be way too long a Facebook Live, but I'll be doing those incrementally over the next few weeks. And mostly, do feel free, if this has just brought up a whole load more questions, to just start adding them under this Facebook Live here. And then I will see when I can get our wonderful Lorianne to go through them and figure out how to answer, and then be able to do a Zoom with her. We have a sick dog. This is all very fascinating. So, and I want to share one thing that I loved, which was this idea of going from Black Friday on a Friday to Billion Trees Friday, which is for all of us, and this was also because we had Thanksgiving yesterday, for all of us to actually just take a moment to think about what we're grateful for that this planet has given us. Not just in the way of trees, but all of us used trees all of our lives, and I wonder how many of us have made it core to our lives to give back. So if we can sit in a moment of deep gratitude for the trees together and feel for how much we would like to start giving back to them, then together we can share this wonderfully obsessive compulsive thing that I'm doing every morning, which is checking the tree counter on the billiontrees.me website and watch that number rise. It rose 5,000 trees per year overnight last night. It's just so amazing to feel people's awareness turning towards this campaign together, and feeling that excitement, and then wanting to go out and invite all our friends. You know, the only way we're going to normalize anything is if we're doing it, and then we're being that invitation for everybody that we love, not from a place of, I daren't ask because what if, but from the place of, what an incredible privilege we have to be able to give back, and how amazing it feels to be able to give back. And here's an organization that is doing not just ecological restoration, but we're really trying to do the consciousness shift work, and we're really working with feminine empowerment. And it's a beautifully unique thing, and it's worthy. And I wanted to start with the sort of logistical guts of it so that you could feel how much rigor is actually underpinning everything that we're doing. So you can also go to the Tree Sisters website, treesisters.org, and look at About Us and scroll down to the trees in there. And you can see more in depth all the different tree projects. They've all got very specific environmental and social economic factors to them. They're all very different. And that's what we'll continue to do, to look for really unique projects that help us understand the myriad miraculous benefits that trees can bring our planet, whilst doing what we know that they do best, which is suck carbon out of the atmosphere, lock it into their bodies, provide species habitat, support watershed management, give us back our soil, help the biodiversity come back. They're completely... My phone just rang. How very interesting. So thank you for being with me. I'm sorry I couldn't do this more succinctly. I look forward to all of your questions, and And hopefully I will reappear at some point in the next week with Lorianne to do a Zoom call with you. And take care.